I was born in a city called Zaria, which is in Kaduna. Kaduna is the state in Nigeria, and this is in northern Nigeria. So northern Nigeria, to kind of set the stage, is primarily dominated by the Hausa tribe. I'm actually Yoruba, which is more from the western part of the country, but my family, right after the independence in Nigeria, there was an initiative to sort of like integrate, right? So they had people going from different parts of the country to go live in other parts of the country, right? Um,
What do you mean? Because I know Nigeria was British run, right, up
Correct.
through 1960.
Up till 1960.
So
And so
1960 independence. What are the tribes?
there's there's like 250 plus tribes in Nigeria. But the biggest ones are Hausa, Yoruba, and Igbo. And so a lot of the people you'll come across for the most part would, be from one of those three tribes, right? I'm Yoruba, which is from the western part of Nigeria. There's Igbo, which is more on the eastern side, and then there's Hausa, which is more on the northern side. There's also Fulani, Tiv, Ibibio. There's so many tribes, but all of those other tribes are embedded sort of somewhere either on the west, east, or
And
northern
these are all
Nigeria.
historic tribes. So
Yes, these are tribes that have been there the thousands of years. So when the British came, pretty much what they did was, how the British did with their colonies, they just drew a little circle and said, okay, this whole area is all British now, and you guys are one country. And so all of these different tribes had never really had a reason to sort of come together to do anything. So pre-independence, what was happening was they had different people running the different parts of the country in order to be able to relate to the different tribes, the different like, kings that they had, and the different like groups, that existed at the time. And so after independence, when Nigeria was sort of left to run on its own, there was sort of a push to try to get people more integrated for Nigeria to become one country, right? And so one of the things that they did was they started this program called the NYSC. That's the National Youth Service Corps, right? And essentially what that was if you graduated from college anywhere in the country, they would intentionally post you to a different part of the country to go live in a different part of the country, which is how most people started to discover other tribes and, learn about the other cultures. And that's sort of how the cultures sort of began to integrate together into what is, I guess, Nigeria. So my parents ending up in Kaduna was actually a part of that initiative, right? Was my mom went to school in Kaduna. My dad met her in Kaduna while he was an engineer, so he was doing work out there, and that's how they met. And so I was born in Kaduna, right? And so because I was born in Kaduna, I got to learn the language, Hausa. So I speak Hausa and obviously Yoruba, which is my native tongue. And obviously the country speaks English. So most people in Nigeria, if you lived in a different part of the country, you would speak at least two to three languages, English being one of them, right? I
is
guess being the
English
main one.
the main? Okay, so that's the more
Correct.
uniting language.
Correct. Correct.
And you said so the actual line that makes the borders of Nigeria was made by the British.
Correct.
And then there's all these tribes that now coexist. It's interesting that they would relocate people. I guess I understand the thinking, but
hmm
wouldn't that also cause unrest because you're forcing different people together?
It's interesting you say that because in 1966 there was a civil war, right? And part of the reason that happened was because certain tribes felt like, this integration was causing disruption to their systems, right? So you had people coming from the east to the north. There was a big push of people from the east going to northern Nigeria, and they were more like business oriented, so they owned a lot of the businesses. You had the western part of Nigeria where the main focus of the leaders at the time was education. So a lot of the most educated people at the time were from the west. So what happened over the years, shortly after independence, is you'll find that a lot of the administrative positions were held by people from the west. A lot of the businesses were owned by people from the east. Obviously, that made the people in the north a little bit uncomfortable. They have more of I guess, Arab system in a sense, where it's sort of a top-down approach with the way that they organize their people. So education was not really a big thing for them. It was more of like a trickle down sort of system where you have a few people at the top and they take care of everybody else, right? But then you have the independent mindset of the people who are Igbo, who are more like entrepreneurial, right? And then you also have the education mindset of the people from the West who are more like, okay, you know what, we're going to go and we're going to put in all the systems in place. And that didn't sit quite well with many of the tribes. So there's a lot of conflict, right? And so the Civil War actually started because of that, right? Was the Northerners saying, hey, we don't want to deal with the Igbo people. So there were a couple of riots. They would go and burn down people's businesses and all that kind of stuff was going on. Oh, we don't want these administrators from the West and so on. So conflicts. And then the Easterners decided, you know what? We want to secede from this country. We don't feel like we're welcome, like in all of these different parts of the country. So we're going to go on our own. And they actually try to get the West initially, to come with them. So the proposal at the time was Northern Nigeria and Southern Nigeria, right? But somehow the Westerners felt like, no, we think this integration thing makes sense. Let's all stick together, yada, yada, yada. And so the Easterners were left alone. And that's what was considered, they wanted to call their country Biafra, right? And so Biafra was trying to secede from Nigeria, and Nigeria, now meaning the North and the West, basically fought the Biafrans and defeated them.
Okay.
And so that's how Nigeria remained one country.
And this is all in just a couple years after independence.
After independence, that's correct, yeah. And I think in an interesting way, in retrospect, people would say the British people set it up that way just so that they could have control, because they felt like if they let all the different regions exist on their own, then it would be difficult to manipulate them. But if you put people in place to control resources in all of these different regions, especially if those people were not from the region, then they would be doing the bidding of the British, as opposed to, focusing more on Nigeria being, one country that's unified and can sort of keep the British people out of what they were trying to sort of keep their hands in, even after independence.
One day, it go better for Naija. Money go circulate like to go day. One day, we no go need to job. Go more to Naija. You don't take, I feel like when you do today. It's still the same guys, still the same lies, still the same breed, still the same greed.